There are so many AI image generators out there now, and it can be really difficult to decipher which one to use for very specific use cases. You've got Midjourney, which a lot of people claim is the best one out there. You've got dall-e 3, which people are starting to call the Midjourney killer. You've got the new version of Firefly, Firefly Image 2, which people are starting to say is just as good as Midjourney and dall-e. You've got Stable Diffusion XL, which anytime I make a video about Midjourney or Firefly, there's always comments about people going, why don't you just use Stable Diffusion? It's so much more customizable. And now we've got Google, who has their own image generator built into their generative search experience. And we've also got Ideogram, which was the talk of the AI art world about a month ago, when it was actually generating pretty decent text inside of images. So in this video, I want to figure out once and for all, what is the best tool for very specific use cases. So we're gonna go through and we're gonna do it at a rapid pace, and we're gonna look at every single tool and we're gonna grade it on accuracy, creativity, realism, illustrations, logos and vectors, textures and background, using text in images, the censorship in the images, the usability of the various user interfaces, and finally, the pricing of each one. And to wrap the whole video up, we'll talk about the pros and cons of each, and we should have a fairly definitive answer on which tool to use for very specific use cases with your AI-generated art. Let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing we're gonna test is accuracy. So for accuracy, we're gonna test prompt adherence. We're gonna pick a couple specific prompts. We're gonna feed that prompt into every single one of these tools here, and then we'll grade it on how accurately it followed along to that prompt. So let's go ahead and start with Midjourney. And for our first prompt, we're gonna use a photo of a green bus floating in space. Taking a look at these, I mean, it did a pretty good job. The buses are a little funky. This one's missing a wheel. This one seems to have some extra wheels on it. This one's not even floating, but pretty close to what I asked for. Let's give it a much more complicated prompt now. For our second prompt, we're gonna use a sitting artist with a bucket hat painting a canvas of a three-headed monster. And if we take a look at these, I mean, they're cool images. We've got the sitting artist. None of them are wearing a bucket hat. Only one of them appears to be painting on canvas. And I guess maybe you can argue this is a three-headed monster if you look close enough, but not super close to what I asked for. For accuracy, let's give Midjourney a 5 out of 10. Now, I don't feel like we can really use Midjourney without using the raw style in Midjourney, because oftentimes if we use style raw, it will actually adhere to the prompt a lot closer. So if we use our first prompt here, a photo of a green bus floating in space, then add -- style raw to the end here, theoretically it should adhere a little bit closer to the prompt and put a little bit less of Midjourney's own style on it. And once again, it followed the basic prompt pretty well. This buses are a little bit funky, but they're definitely all green buses in space. Now let's do style raw for our second prompt. And once again, they're not perfect. None of these look like a three-headed monster, but they all are a sitting artist. One of them, arguably two of them, have a bucket hat, and it did catch that they're painting on canvas this time, so it got more of the elements right. But admittedly, this is a pretty complex prompt, so a lot of these tools aren't going to do this one great. But I have to give raw mode a slight edge above the regular Midjourney because it did get a slight bit closer. So let's go ahead and call this one a 5.5. All right, now let's move on to dall-e inside of ChatGPT. So if I have dall-e selected here, I'll just go ahead and paste my prompt for our green bus floating in space. And if we look at these are all pretty dang good. This one here kind of made a yellow and green bus, but I mean, these other ones are all pretty great. Now let's give it our more complicated prompt and see how well it adheres to that one. Honestly, I'm pretty blown away. We have a sitting artist wearing a bucket hat, painting a three-headed monster on canvas. I don't think it could nail this better tthan it did. So for dall-e 3 instead of ChatGPT, I'm gonna give this one a 9 out of 10 because it's nailing it. But dall-e 3 is also available inside of Bing's image creator, and a lot of people have pointed out that there are differences between the images you get inside of ChatGPT and the images you get inside of Bing's image creator. A lot of these differences are going to become more apparent as we get into some of the later criteria that we're going to discuss, but let's go ahead and test these prompts inside of Bing's image creator here. Now inside of Bing image creator, it did the green bus floating in space pretty well for all of them. No complaints here. And once again, dall-e 3 pretty much nailed it with this one as well. We've got an artist who is sitting down, wearing a bucket hat, painting on canvas of a three-headed monster. All of these images are great. Gonna give this one a 9 as well. dall-e 3 in both platforms pretty much nailed the accuracy. Now I want to test Stable Diffusion, and my favorite platform to create with Stable Diffusion is actually Leonardo. Now, Leonardo has their own pipeline that actually does some additional creative effects to the images, and it does use SDXL as part of that pipeline. So to compare the other image generators against SDXL, we're going to use Leonardo and its additional pipeline to sort of get the best that we can out of SDXL. And there we go, 2 green buses floating in space. Both look pretty good, no complaints on either one of those. Now let's add our slightly more complicated prompt. And it didn't quite nail it, but in my opinion, it did actually do better than Midjourney at adhering to the prompt. We've got our sitting artist, we've got a bucket hat. They both have monsters in it. Neither of them are 3-headed monsters. Let's go 6.5. All right, let's move on to Firefly Image 2, the newest image generator in town. And here are our green buses floating in space. It gives it kind of more of a cartoony style, but they are all green buses floating in space. Now, when we give it our second prompt here, they aren't bad. All of the artists are sitting. One of them's wearing a bucket hat-ish. They're all painting on canvas. They're all painting monsters, but none of them actually are painting the 3-headed monster. So it sort of missed that one little element of the 3-headed monster. I'd say it's on par with what we got out of Leonardo. So let's go ahead and give it a 6.5 as well. All right, now we have Google's generative search experience, and they just recently rolled out the ability to generate images directly from search. So if I type in my Google search here, create, and then paste in our prompt, a photo of a green bus floating in space, you can see it now generates images up here. And here are our green buses floating in space. Now it seemed to take some artistic license and turn it into like a VW bus, but I'll take it. It followed the prompt. Now if I give it the prompt, create an image of a sitting artist with a bucket hat painting a canvas of a 3-headed monster, I actually get this. AI generated images aren't available for this search. Try creating something else. But asking it to go one more time, it actually generated the images the second time around. Artist, sitting, canvas. It looks like it danced around the 3-headed monster. This one seems to be a 2-headed monster, and this one seems to be a 4-headed monster. But it definitely seems to be closer than Firefly in that it figured out that it needs to create a painting with a multi-headed monster. So let's go 7.2. And finally, we have Ideogram, which is a tool that a lot of people were talking about for a very short amount of time. And here's what it came up with for us. We've got a sort of cartoon of a green bus in space. We've got a green bus definitely not in space, a green bus definitely not in space, and a green VW bus definitely not in space. Not amazing. Plugging in our more complicated prompt here, let's see what we get out of that. And here's what we got from that. So this one got the sitting and maybe the bucket hat a little bit. This one actually got the 3-headed monster, the sitting and the bucket hat. But seeing as how it sort of messed up the really basic one with the green bus floating in space and kind of did an okay job with the second more complicated one, especially this one right here, which is fairly close. I've got to put it about the same level as Firefly and give it a 6.7. And looking at our first criteria of accuracy, here's how it all kind of shook out. Midjourney got a 5, Midjourney Raw 5.5, dall-e 3 got a 9. It really nailed the prompt adherence. SDXL 6.5, Firefly 2 6.5, Google I gave a 7.2, and Ideogram a 6.7. And now that you have a fairly decent idea of how I'm going to be ranking these, I'm going to try to pick up the pace in this video and just crank through the rest of these prompts. I'm going to tell you the prompts that I'm going to use, show you the results, give you a score, and we're just going to keep this thing moving. So for creativity, we're going to give it barely any information in our prompt and make a very subjective judgment call around which of these tools are more creative and which ones just kind of make boring images if you don't give it much context. So jumping back to Midjourney, I'm just going to give it the prompt, beautiful, creative, epic, RGB image. And here's what Midjourney generated. And I actually think all of these look really amazing. They've got a lot of color. They've got some amazing contrast. Interesting how with that same prompt, they all kind of have a person looking off into this colorfulness and then a random like eagle. But I would say as far as creativity goes, that's pretty solid. Now let's just give it a 1-word prompt. I'm going to give it the prompt beauty. It clearly associates beauty with women, and all of these are pretty dang creative. I like all of them. They all came out really good. For Midjourney, I got to give creativity a high ranking. I'm going to give Midjourney a 9 on the creativity scale. The prompt, beautiful, creative, epic RGB image in the style of Raw, came up with these. They look amazing, but I'm not a fan of the fact that they tried to put some random letters in there, so I got to dock it a point for that. But this tree image here, I think is amazing. If you cropped out these letters here, that looks really cool. This image is really good here. Great image here. It looked like it tried to incorporate some letters. Same with this one. And here's what it generated when I plugged in beauty in style raw. We get a more realistic looking image for 3 out of 4 of them. Still pretty good. Definitely not as creative as the non-raw version. So let's go ahead and give Midjourney Raw an 8. Using dall-e with ChatGPT, here's our epic RGB images. They are all pretty dang creative, pretty dang colorful, but they sort of lack some of that contrast, some of that depth that we saw inside of Midjourney. They are all very cool, but I have to give Midjourney a slight edge. And when entering the prompt beauty, these are the images we get. They're pretty good, but in my completely subjective opinion, I wouldn't say that they're quite as creative as what you get out of something like Midjourney. So I gotta give dall-e 3 with ChatGPT 7.5. Now, testing dall-e 3 inside of Bing Image Creator, I feel like our epic RGB image is even less creative. It just kind of made a whole bunch of colorful swirls. And when given the prompt beauty, it kind of created 3 women's face that all look like they could be the same person. Interestingly, I'm finding dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT to be more creative than dall-e 3 inside of Bing Image Creator. And I think that might be because when you're using it in ChatGPT, I think ChatGPT might be adding some additional context to the prompt to try to get better images. So for Bing Image Creator, without much context to the image, it's not great. I got to give it about a 6. Now jumping over to Leonardo, given our epic RGB prompt, we get these 2 images and they look great. I mean, we're back to sort of Midjourney level. I feel like Midjourney might have a little bit deeper contrast, and both of these images are very similar. I would think with such a broad prompt, we would actually get more unique, diverse images, but these are both pretty dang good. Now, given the prompt beauty, once again, we get 2 images of females. Both of them seem to have a bunch of flowers around the hair. It's just interesting to me that I can give such a nondescript prompt and it would create multiple images that are essentially the same subject. Where when we look at something like Midjourney, especially the raw, these are all kind of different from each other. I do, however, think this created some pretty good images. It's definitely better than what we saw from the creative images from dall-e. It's got more contrast. And to my eye, they're just more impressive looking images. I'd put it more on par with that Midjourney raw model and give it a 7.9. Using our beautiful, creative, epic RGB image prompt inside of Firefly 2, we get a bunch of colorful swirl images. They're cool. They're definitely nowhere near the level of what we'd get from the creativity of something like Midjourney or even dall-e 3 in ChatGPT. And when I enter the prompt beauty into Adobe Firefly, I actually get a pop-up that says the prompt is too short, and then I get pretty much similar images that almost look like they're a golf course or a park with some trees and a lake. So from a creativity standpoint, so far, Firefly has been probably on the lowest end of the spectrum for adding their own unique creative spin. So for Adobe Firefly, I'm gonna give it a 5. Using Google, asking the same prompt, I actually get 4 very unique images. This is the first one where all 4 images are completely different than each other. However, I feel like it's really missing the colorfulness, right? I asked for an RGB image, and this image is really like only a few color tones. Same with this image. This one has some really colorful neons to it, and this one does have a rainbow going through it, but it's really missing that ultra colorful element. And when asking it to create an image to represent beauty, it says an AI-powered overview is not available. I've actually searched it a couple times now, and it's refused to create this image a few times. Now, the first image was a little bit better than Firefly, but probably not quite as good as dall-e 3, so I gotta give it a 5.3. And here's what Ideogram generated with our RGB image. Once again, 4 completely different images from each other, all pretty creative. It doesn't have that same depth of contrast that Midjourney has, but they're all really cool, really creative images. I especially like this lion and this person walking inside the colorful woods. For the prompt beauty, once again, we get 4 female images. This one has an extra finger. This one has some wonky fingers. They're not amazing images, but I did like the first RGB images that it gave me. So definitely better than Google and Firefly, but absolutely not on the same level as Midjourney. This one I'd have to give 6.8. And here's where we stand on creativity. Midjourney definitely wins out in the creativity department, followed closely by SDXL and Leonardo, and dall-e 3, the ChatGPT version. Now let's take a look at realism. This one we're going to use the prompt image of a couple holding hands in front of the Eiffel Tower. And I'm just going to use one prompt across the board for all of this because the people and the location are either going to look realistic or they're not. In order to keep this video under an hour long, we're just going to play around with a single prompt. So using Midjourney, we get some pretty dang realistic images. Upscaling this one here, I would say this one could probably fool some people, other than the fact that these lights appear to just be floating in the sky here. The Eiffel Tower looks pretty good. The people look pretty good, although there's not much detail in the face or anything like that. And he appears to be grabbing her arm weirdly. But I'd say on a realism scale, I'd give this image a 7.5. I think most people would look at this and know it's AI generated just by the floating lights in the sky here. Now, looking at Midjourney style raw, I actually think these images are even more realistic. If I upscale this one here, I have a hard time picking out anything about this one that screams AI. Now, I've actually never been to the Eiffel Tower in France, so this might not be what it looks like to the walk-up of the Eiffel Tower at all. And if you know what that looks like, then you'd probably be able to spot whether or not this is not real. But these people look super real. This sort of slightly blurred out tower in the background looks realistic. The light posts look realistic. The people in the background look realistic. This image is pretty convincing. Let's go 8.5. Now jumping into dall-e 3, none of these really look super realistic. This almost has like a Pixar kind of quality to it where it looks computer generated. Same with this one, especially with all the fingers going on here. Something looks off there. They just look slightly cartoony to me. I'll give it a 5. Now plugging it into Bing's image creator, they actually look slightly more realistic. This image looks more realistic than any of the ones we just looked at inside of ChatGPT's dall-e. This one, there's some weirdness going on with the face. You can definitely tell this one's AI generated. This one's looking pretty good too, but once again, you can see a lack of detail in the facial features here. And then this one's just not realistic at all. It looks almost like a hand drawing. But I would have to say that this did a better job at realism than dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT. I'll give it a 6. Now let's take a look at what Leonardo generated. That's looking pretty realistic. Definitely better than what we were getting out of dall-e, but still some weirdness in the face. You look at these faces and there's just something a little off. There's a lack of detail around the lips and the teeth, and a lack of detail around the lips on this. And then when you look at the way they're holding hands, yeah, there's kind of an issue with the hands on this one still. And then if you really look close, the Eiffel Tower has too many legs here. There's a leg here, a leg here, a leg here, a leg here, and then some more legs in the background. So, you know, I got to take away some points for that. But overall, it's looking pretty decent. And then here's the second one that it generated. And if we look at the faces here, definitely a lack of realism in the faces here. And the Eiffel Tower almost looks like it's a tangle of cords or something. The structure definitely looks like it's bent or something right here, and there's just some funkiness going on with the tower. I'd put it on par with what we just saw out of dall-e 3 with Bing's image creator. Maybe a slight step up. Let's give it a 6.3. Now, when I plugged it into Firefly Image 2, it actually ignored the fact that I wanted it in front of the Eiffel Tower. So when I look at these images, they look fairly realistic until you look closely at the face, and the faces definitely have something funky going on in this one. This one looks pretty dang realistic, actually. The hands look good. Maybe there's a little bit of a lack of detail in the face. Now, it didn't really follow my prompt instructions, but I'm judging criteria on realism and not accuracy of prompt. And this is looking pretty good. It looks like it could have been taken on just like a lower megapixel camera. This one's looking pretty good too, but there's something funky going on with their hands. I think she broke his wrist or something. This face is looking pretty realistic to me. This one, there's a little bit of funkiness going on around the teeth, and this one's looking pretty real as well. I'm going to try it one more time, see if it gets me the Eiffel Tower in there. One or more of the words may not meet user guidelines and were removed. But these ones are all looking pretty realistic. They just ignored my prompt. And people holding hands seem to be a problem. But as far as faces go, it's probably the most realistic we've seen. It's hard to put it on par with what we saw out of Midjourney here, so I'll put it somewhere between the two Midjourney versions and give this one an 8 for realism. Now, looking at what Google gave us, neither of these are even close to being realistic. Let's give Google a 3 on this. And finally, taking a peek at ideogram, definitely some issues with this image. The woman looks like she's 9 feet tall, or the man is like 3 feet tall. I don't know what's going on here. This face will give you nightmares. There's pretty much no detail in the people here on this one. And once again, I don't know what's going on with this person's face. I mean, the Eiffel Tower looks not too bad, but that's more because it's sort of blurred out. I'll give it a 4. Here's where we stand on the realism scale with Midjourney Raw being the most realistic, Firefly 2 being the second best, and Midjourney without using Raw being the third best. All the rest kind of left a lot to be desired. Now let's look at illustrations. The last one was looking at how well it did realistic images. This one's going to look at how well it does sort of drawings and illustrated work. Now for this test, instead of Midjourney, I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to Niji mode because we know this is more of an illustration style model. For this one, we're going to use the prompt an anime girl with braids in the neon streets of Tokyo. And here's what we got out of Midjourney using the Niji mode. I'd say all of them look pretty good. I love the contrast that we get out of Midjourney. To this day, I feel like it does sort of colorful, contrasty images better than any of the other platforms. I'm going to go ahead and roll with an 8 on this one. Now you can't use Niji mode and Style Raw at the same time. They're not compatible. So when I use Style Raw, it actually tries to make a realistic image of an anime girl, which these images look great, but I'm trying to get an illustration and Style Raw doesn't really do that well. So for that reason, I'm going to give the Style Raw just like a 3. It's just not what the Raw mode is designed to do. Here's what dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT created. They all look really good, really coherent. They don't have that same level of contrast that we get out of Midjourney, but they're all still really solid images. I'm gonna give it a 7. Now looking at Bing Image Creator, very similar style to what we got out of ChatGPT. When looking closely at them, this one has some extra funky braids going on here. That one's pretty good. They're all decent images. I would say on par with what we got out of the ChatGPT version, but still not quite that same level of contrast that we get out of Midjourney. So same as the ChatGPT version, I give it a 7. Looking at Leonardo, here's what we get. And Leonardo also has that contrast, that depth that you see in Midjourney as well. Here's our first image. Here's the second image it generated. Both of them are really, really solid. I've got to give it a level above what we're seeing out of dall-e 3, but maybe not quite as good as what we got out of Midjourney. Maybe on par. I'm gonna go 7.8. Here's what we get out of Firefly Image 2. All of these are really good. They actually have those deep, dark contrast. They're all very, very solid. I mean, I can't complain about any one of these images. They're on par with what we've seen so far. It's hard to give this the same rating as what I gave this. I'm gonna go 7.5. Once again, trying it on Google, it says AI generated images aren't available for this search. Try creating something else. I tried a whole bunch of prompts. I finally got it to create some images by typing create an illustration of an animated character. And we actually got a SpongeBob, a Pokemon, the Little Mermaid, and Mickey Mouse. So all characters that are existing IP, which is fairly interesting. But it does do illustrations pretty well. Just it wouldn't adhere to the prompt that I gave it, unfortunately. If I give it the prompt created an illustration of an anime character, I also get some pretty solid illustrations. I mean, that is a really good image. So prompt adherence, not great or very, very censored, but the actual illustrations it gives is pretty good. I'm gonna give it a 6.5 just because I had to test so many different iterations of this prompt to actually get something out of it. And then finally looking at ideogram, these are all pretty good. I wish there was a little more detail in the face. That one looks good as well. Some weirdness going on in the face here. Not bad, not bad. I'll give this one a 6.8. And here's what we got for illustration. All of them, to be honest, are pretty solid at creating illustrations other than trying to use Midjourney Raw, which is just not designed for. Midjourney, I think, was the best. Leonardo and Firefly 2 are up there with it, but across the board, all of these tools are pretty decent at creating illustrations. And also keep in mind, these numbers are ultra subjective. I'm literally just picking them at random based on my own subjectivity. You might score these totally different. All right, now we're going to test logos and vectors with each one of these. Let's see which one you'd want to use if you're trying to generate a logo. So for this one, we're going to use the prompt simple flat vector image logo of a wolf on a white background. In Midjourney, here's what we get. All of these look pretty solid to me. I especially like the top left and the bottom right one. I'll give it an 8. Using Style Raw, once again, all pretty good. I would say it's on par with the non-raw version, also an 8. Looking at dall-e 3 instead of ChatGPT, I really like this one, how it's sort of squared off. This one leaves a little bit to be desired, so does this one. This one's not bad. They're pretty good. I think Midjourney did a slightly better job, but they're pretty good. 7.5. Using Bing Image Creator, once again, all pretty good. I would say it's on par with what we got out of the ChatGPT version, also 7.5. Now, looking at Leonardo here, they're a little less simple. I like what it generated, but it's not exactly what I was looking for when I asked for a simple flat logo. So while these images look great, and they do look like vectors, they got the vector part great, they're not quite as simple as I'd like. If I was to generate a logo, I'm not sure that this would be the exact tool I would use, but also Leonardo has so many other models that are probably better for this. So I'd probably test different models to come to a logo using Leonardo. But for the sake of this demonstration, I'm going to give it a 6. Adobe Firefly actually did a pretty good job. These all look pretty solid. I have to say that these are probably better than what we got out of something like dall-e. So I'm going to go ahead and say 7.8. Using Google, it actually kind of nailed what I was asking for. These are all simple, flat vector potential logo images. It did a really good job. I'd say an image like this is actually slightly more impressive than even what I got out of Midjourney here. I'm gonna go 8.3. And then looking at Ideogram, it did a pretty good job as well. I'd say these are on par with what we got out of Firefly, fairly similar style to what you'd get from Firefly. So I'm gonna match Firefly and say 7.8. So taking a look at logos and vectors, all of them actually did a pretty good job, but surprisingly, Google was the standout for me as far as logos go, followed closely by Midjourney, and then Firefly 2 and Ideogram both did a great job. dall-e did a great job. The only one that sort of didn't meet my expectations specifically for logo design was Leonardo. All right, now let's look at textures and backgrounds. For this, we're gonna see how well it can do with tiling and creating a sort of textured tile background. For this one, we're gonna use the prompt colorful circuitry. And then inside of Midjourney, you gotta give it a --tile command to get it to actually do the tiling effect. So Midjourney does a great job at creating these tileable images here. If you were to lay one of these 4 images side by side by side, they would all line up and match. It works with both regular Midjourney as well as Style Raw, both very, very similar images, but I feel like this test is almost like a pass-fail test. It either does tiling or it doesn't do tiling. And since both versions of Midjourney do tiling, I'm gonna go ahead and give them both a 10. Now, using dall-e 3 with ChatGPT, I gave it the prompt colorful circuitry, but then I also gave the additional context, make the image a repeatable tile. And you can see that it did exactly that. If I was to download this image here and set it as my desktop background, you can see that it doesn't actually tile that well. You can see all the seams where it's supposed to tile. Comparing that one to this one that we made in Midjourney here, if I set this one as the desktop background, you can see that it actually does seamlessly tile. You can't find the seams on this one. So although dall-e claimed it made a tileable image, it's actually not. It sort of hallucinated that it's tileable. And if we just look at some of these other images, you can see there's a yellow line going here, which means that yellow line should be connecting somewhere down here, but we're not seeing that yellow line pop in. So this one is not actually tiling. They're not doing what they said they would do. And since this is kind of a pass-fail, I kind of gotta give it a 0. Now, if I look at Bing Image Creator, I gave it colorful circuitry, repeatable tile, and I can tell just by looking at these that these are also not repeatable. If we take a look at this image, for example, you can see this blue line kind of comes up here and then goes off to the right, top right of the image, which means down here, we should see that blue line continued somewhere, but we're not seeing this continuation. So this one also would not properly tile. Also pass fail. It's a 0. Now, if we look at Leonardo here, if I come over to my settings on the left side, you can actually see they have an option for tiling. So if I flip this on, it gave me 2 images that are tileable. So let's go ahead and download one of them. I'll set it as my desktop background. And as you can see, it is properly tiling and I can't tell where the seams are. So Leonardo, pass. That's a 10. For Adobe Firefly, I gave it this prompt colorful circuitry, repeatable tile. And these ones might tile. I'm having a hard time telling just by looking at them. Let's go ahead and pick this one here. Now, just looking at this one, it looks like it probably will tile. You can see how this line goes off here and then would connect right here. This line goes off here and would connect right here. Same with this and this. Let's go ahead and download it, set it as my desktop background. And if we take a look at it, it's definitely tiling. I'm not seeing where the seams are on this one. That one is a pass, it gets a 10. I can't get Google to create any sort of tile, so that's a 0. And looking at Ideogram, these do look tileable to me. let's go ahead and try one. Setting it as my desktop background, it is attempting to tile, but you can definitely see the seams where it's not quite doing it right. There's a seam right along here and a seam right along here. And the fact that we can see the seam, it didn't pass my tiling test. So ideogram, sorry. So for textures and backgrounds, basically a test of tiling. Midjourney can do it. SDXL, Leonardo can do it. Firefly 2 can do it. dall-e 3, Google, and ideogram all seem to struggle with it still. Now let's see which ones can do text in image. This is a newer thing that's been happening in AI images lately, where more of the models are actually allowing you to do this. For this one, I'm going to use the prompt, a penguin holding a wooden sign that says subscribe to Matt Wolfe. So taking a peek at Midjourney, we got the penguin holding a wooden sign, but it can't really figure out the text yet. This one also puts some human hands on the penguin. So Midjourney, got to give it a 0 on this one because it really can't do text at all. Looking at Midjourney raw, same thing. We got a penguin. This one even looks like a sort of realistic penguin. It's holding up a wooden sign, but the text is just not even close. Also a 0. All right, so looking at dall-e inside of ChatGPT, we got 4 penguins all holding up wood signs. Subscribe to Matt Wolfe. This one nailed it. We got a typo in subscribe here. They also spelled my first name wrong. Subscribe to Matt Wolfe. Once again, a typo in the word subscribe and also a typo in the word subscribe. So dall-e 3 can do text and it does pretty good. I got 1 out of 4 on this. I'm gonna go ahead and give dall-e a 7.5 on this one because it can do text, but there's room for improvement. And if you wanted to get text out of dall-e, probably just got to prompt it a couple times and eventually it will nail it perfect. Looking at dall-e inside of Bing's image creator, subscribe to Matt Wolfe, subscribe to Matt Wolfe. It missed an I here, but both of them kind of nailed the text. And just like the other version of dall-e that was in ChatGPT, it prompted a couple times. It's going to nail the text on one of them. 7.5 also. Now, taking a look at Leonardo, we've actually got some pretty good looking penguins holding up some wood signs, and it's actually closer than I thought we would get, right? So this penguin, you can tell the words aren't quite right. It spelled my last name right. My first name was wrong, subscribe, and they put torte instead of 2. This one is really only missing the C in subscribe. It added an extra F here and then said my name was Matt Whitwell. So it's getting closer than Midjourney, but it's still not really doing it great. I'm going to give it a 4.5. Looking at Firefly 2 here, it's not great. I would say slightly better than what we were getting out of Midjourney, but not by much. The images look good. They got the penguin, they got the wood sign, but it's not even really coming close to the words. It's got some of the letters right, which is better than what we can say for Midjourney, but still not great. I'm going to say 1.5. You're not going to go here if you need an image with accurate words in it. So in order to get this to work on Google, I had to change the prompt a little bit. I typed create an image of a penguin holding a wooden sign that says subscribe. If I put it in quotes, it didn't work. And if I put subscribe to Matt Wolfe, it didn't work. But when I put this, you can see that there's a penguin holding a wooden sign that says subscribe. But if I say to Matt Wolfe and search it, it doesn't seem to work. If I add quotations around it, also doesn't seem to work. Nonetheless, I can get it to generate images with text, and the text is correct every single time. So it's working well. I just can't seem to get it to do more than one word for some reason. Maybe you know what I'm doing wrong. If you do, let me know in the comments. But because it's actually getting the words right and it's following the prompt I asked it to do, I'm going to give this one like a 7.7. It would be higher if it actually was able to do more than one word at a time for me. And now when I look at ideogram, the one that sort of kickstarted this ability to add text and images, it's pretty solid as well. It didn't get the whole thing. This penguin just says subscribe. This penguin just says Matt Wolfe. This one says subscribe to Matt Wolfe. And this one says subscribe Matt Wolfe. Other than the fact that it didn't get the entire statement onto the sign, there's no typos and it followed the prompt pretty well. And just like dall-e, if I was to generate it again, it would eventually get the perfect image for me. So I have to put ideogram on the same level as like dall-e for the text inside the images. And I'm going to give it a 7.6, 0.1 more. So for text and image, Midjourney gets a 0 on both accounts. dall-e 3 gets a 7.5 on both accounts. Leonardo and Firefly, not really doing it too well. And then Google and ideogram also do fairly decent. So if you need to get text in your image, go to dall-e 3, Google, or ideogram to get it. Now let's look at censorship and see if we can get it to generate images that use either celebrity faces or IP and logos and things like that. So for this one, I'm going to do Tom Hanks standing next to a stormtrooper. So we've got Tom Hanks, a celebrity, and a stormtrooper, which is obviously Disney IP, and let's see if it'll generate that. So looking at Midjourney, it made both Tom Hanks and a stormtrooper. Pretty surprised by that. I didn't actually think it would. And the style raw also did the same. And they're pretty dang realistic too. Now, given the prompt SpongeBob with Super Mario, it actually managed to pull in Mario decently well, but couldn't figure out the SpongeBob. Using style raw, same thing. It got Mario pretty well, but really no SpongeBob there. So surprisingly, Midjourney isn't really censoring celebrity names like Tom Hanks or IP like Stormtroopers and Mario, but there are some celebrities that it just will not create. For example, if I give the prompt Joe Rogan behind the microphone, none of those really look like Joe Rogan. But surprisingly, it generated everything I wanted. I don't think it doesn't know what SpongeBob looks like. It's just not very good at doing two characters next to each other. For example, here's what it gives me when I give it the prompt SpongeBob SquarePants. So I'm going to give both Midjourney versions 7.5. Now, looking at dall-e 3 instead of ChatGPT, it couldn't get Tom Hanks, but it did get the Stormtrooper. And it says, here are the images of the recognizable male actor standing next to a Stormtrooper. Now, if I do the prompt SpongeBob with Super Mario, it says I'm unable to generate images of SpongeBob with Super Mario due to content policy restrictions. So although it generated a Stormtrooper, it wouldn't generate Tom Hanks, it wouldn't generate Super Mario, it wouldn't generate SpongeBob. So I'm going to give it like a 3. When I jump into Bing Image Creator and put Tom Hanks standing next to a Stormtrooper, it says this prompt has been blocked. It flagged the prompt because it may conflict with our content policy, which is a little frustrating because it was letting me do prompts like this like 2 days ago. So this is a brand new thing where it's no longer letting me create whatever I want. However, when I do SpongeBob SquarePants with Super Mario, it gives me both of those characters just fine. You can also see in a previous prompt, I was able to get Larry David with Serena Williams. So it does appear that it's got some censorship, but not as much as what the ChatGPT version has. So I've got to give this one like a 6 because it's still letting me generate these images right now. But I have a feeling a lot of this IP is going to be totally blocked in the near future. All right, looking at Leonardo, we've got Tom Hanks with a Stormtrooper. Pretty dang convincing too. This Stormtrooper has a random hand on his shoulder, but other than that, they look pretty dang good. Using SpongeBob SquarePants with Super Mario, it makes an attempt. They don't look great, but it's definitely not censoring them. As far as I know, Leonardo doesn't censor anything. You could make adult content with this one if you want. So Leonardo, as far as censorship goes, it gets a 10. They don't censor anything. Firefly version 2, on the other hand, when I did Tom Hanks standing next to a Stormtrooper, we don't have something that looks like Tom Hanks or a Stormtrooper. And when I do SpongeBob SquarePants with Super Mario, it just says you can't use those words. So as far as censorship goes, Firefly seems to be the most censored. I'm going to give it a 1. Now, when I do create an image of Tom Hanks standing next to a Stormtrooper in Google, it actually won't generate that image for me. In Google, when I do create an image of Super Mario with SpongeBob, it actually does generate the image for me. If I just say create an image of Tom Hanks, it won't generate it for me. But if I type create an image of a Stormtrooper, it actually will generate it for me. So it seems like it won't generate celebrities, but it will still generate like trademarked characters. I'd put it on the same level playing field with Midjourney and give it a 7.5. And then Ideogram, we get a Stormtrooper with Tom Hanks. It doesn't seem to have issues. I mean, it's not the best looking Tom Hanks, but it will generate it. And not only did Ideogram generate images of Super Mario hanging out with SpongeBob, it actually generated an image of Super Mario giving SpongeBob the bird. Now, I'm not going to try to create any adult images or anything like that, but from what I can tell from like an IP standpoint and a celebrity standpoint, Ideogram doesn't seem to be too censored at all. It's not the greatest at generating some of these images, but it doesn't seem to be censored. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a 10. Here's what the censorship looks like. Ideogram and SDXL will pretty much generate anything you want it to. Google and Midjourney seem to create most things, but also seem to not generate a few other things, while dall-e and Firefly tend to reject a lot of things if it has specific IP or people's names in them. Now, these last two categories, we're going to fly through really, really quickly. We're going to talk about usability, and then we're going to talk about pricing, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap this thing up. So Midjourney, from a usability standpoint, a little bit frustrating because you do have to still do it inside of Discord. And Discord can get very overwhelming, especially if you're in a lot of channels, and you have to learn all the various commands to get exactly what you want. So not the best user experience out of the bunch. I'm going to say Midjourney's a 5. dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT works great. You just switch it on, type your prompt, you get what you want, and then you can have real conversations with it and say, change the aspect ratio to this, add more color, remove this, and it will very easily alter the image for you. So if you're familiar with ChatGPT and the user experience of that, dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT is kind of the same user experience. I give it an 8. Now, dall-e 3 inside of Bing's image creator, pretty good. You just enter a prompt here and click create, but it does lack a lot of features. We can't change the aspect ratio. There's no sort of additional in-painting. It's just very, very bare bones. You enter a prompt, you get what you get. I'm gonna give it a 6. Leonardo, on the other hand, quite the opposite. You can do so much with it. You can change the number of images it generates, turn it into photoreal, turn on their alchemy, change the dimensions, flip on tiling, use ControlNet, upload images, and they have a ton of models. It will even help you generate the prompts for you. So you just click on prompt generation, enter a basic idea, stormtrooper, click ideate. It will create a whole bunch of prompts that you can just use. So from a user interface standpoint, real simple prompting with all the bells and whistles, all of the customizability. You can do so much with this. I give it a 9. Firefly 2, similar to Leonardo, they've got this side panel with a whole bunch of extra features, change the aspect ratio, do photo or art, change the visual intensity, the style. There's various effects. You can upload an image and have it match the style of that image. There's negative prompts. There's a lot that you can do with Firefly. Not as much as Leonardo, but there's still a lot you can do. Real simple user interface, real intuitive, no real complaints here. I'm gonna give it an 8. Google, if you're familiar with using Google, well, then you're familiar with using this. The problem that I have with Google is a lot of times I would say create an image of, and then a prompt, and it would try to do a search for it. Or I would say create an image of, put a prompt there, and it would say, would you like us to generate a chat from this? And it's real kind of confusing about the exact wording that you need to get right to get it to actually generate an image, because sometimes it will generate the image and sometimes it will think you're trying to search, even though you're kind of giving it the same similar prompt. And it's just very bizarre, and I haven't quite figured it out yet. So I've got to give this a 6 because I'm still confused by it. Finally, ideogram, really, really simple. Enter a prompt, click generate, and you get what you get. We do have an extra option to remix here, which gives us a little bit more functionality, but not much more functionality than what you get out of Bing Image Creator, just maybe a slight notch above it because we have a remix option. Therefore, 6.3. And finally, let's talk about price. Midjourney itself, the lowest plan is $10 a month, which is not super expensive, but if you want to do this stuff for free, there is some cost involved. I'm going to give it a 6 on cost. Now, if you want to use dall-e 3 instead of ChatGPT, you do have to be a ChatGPT Plus member, which is $20 a month, which among all the options we talked about, I believe makes it the most expensive. So I'm going to give this one a 5. Now, dall-e 3 instead of Bing Image Creator, free right now. You can absolutely use it 100% for free. You get a certain amount of credits, and even after you use your credits, you can still continue to use it. It just generates slower. So I got to give this a 10. Now, Leonardo does offer both a free plan and a paid plan. The free plan gets you a certain amount of tokens to generate every single day, a very generous amount. You can probably generate as much images as you want, but you do lose a few of the features that come with the paid plan. If you do want to upgrade to a paid plan, it's $10 a month, which puts it on par with the cost of Midjourney, but you can also generate way more images for that cost than Midjourney, and they do have a free tier, which makes it a step above Midjourney. Therefore, I got to give Leonardo 7.5. Now, Firefly, they have both a free plan and a paid plan. The free plan gets you 25 image generations a month. The paid plan is $5 a month and gets you 100 monthly generative credits. Now, if you're already an Adobe Creative Cloud member like I am, then you also get Firefly within your Adobe Creative Cloud membership. But because there is a free tier and the paid tier is only $5, I got to give it like a 6.5 because this amount of monthly credits is fairly limited. Now, the Google version is completely free. So as far as a price ranking, I gotta give it a 10. Ideogram is also currently completely free for anybody to use. So once again, this is also a 10. And here's how the whole thing shakes out. If you want the most accurate generations from the prompts you give it, you want to use something like dall-e. Google also seems to be good, but it does have some usability issues and maybe some possible censorship issues. If you want the most creative images possible, Midjourney and Leonardo or Stable Diffusion are probably the way to go. If you're looking for the most realistic images possible, Midjourney is great at that, and so is Firefly. You want some great illustrations? Midjourney is probably your best bet. Leonardo and Stable Diffusion XL are also really good for that. Honorable mention to dall-e and Firefly. If I'm being honest, pretty much all of them are pretty good at illustration type art. Logos and vectors, Google seemed to do the best at that, followed by Midjourney and Ideogram. They were all pretty decent at doing vectors other than Leonardo. That was the one that struggled the most with that. If you want to do textures and backgrounds that actually tile, Midjourney does it, Stable Diffusion and Leonardo does it, Firefly version 2 does it, the rest don't. If you want to actually get text inside of your images, look into the Google image generator, look into Ideogram, and look into the dall-e versions. Those are all capable of doing text. If you want the least censored version possible, definitely go with Stable Diffusion with something like Leonardo, or you can try Ideogram. Ideogram seems to be fairly uncensored. Midjourney and Google also seem to be doing a pretty good job of generating, famous people and, IP inside of their work. If you're looking for the best usability, my opinion is Leonardo's the best at that, followed by Firefly and dall-e 3, because I just love that ChatGPT interface to just sort of dial in the image I'm looking for. And if price is an issue, there's a handful of free options in dall-e with Bing Image Chat and Google and Ideogram. So like we've covered, all of these image generators are pretty good, but they do different things better than others. Ideogram is free, it doesn't seem to censor, it does pretty good with text and images, and it does pretty good with logos. Midjourney, on the other hand, is not free, but it's great at creating creative images, textures, logos, illustrations. It kind of does everything pretty well, but not for free. And then the best sort of middle ground, in my opinion, is Leonardo, because while it's not free, it's the least censored and does pretty much everything fairly well, other than text inside of your images at the moment. All right, so if I sum all of these up, it's a possible score of 100 for each one. And essentially, I came to the conclusion that Leonardo is probably the best value. It came out with a 75.5 score across the board. The only thing that it wasn't really great at was the text inside of images. And then in second place, it's a tie between Midjourney and Ideogram. Midjourney is much more creative and realistic, but it also has some cost and some usability drawbacks, where Ideogram is free to use, it's uncensored, it can do text, but it's not quite as accurate or creative or realistic. So there's some drawbacks there. The one that shockingly performed the worst across all of these was dall-e 3 inside of ChatGPT, and mostly because you need to pay $20 a month to be able to use it. It's very highly censored. It can't do textures and backgrounds. It wasn't very great with realism, and then was pretty middle of the road across everything else except for accuracy. And if you want that same accuracy, well, you can get it using dall-e 3 in Bing's image creator and use that for free right now. It is a little bit censored and you can't get as custom with the images, but they're pretty dang accurate and they do pretty good illustrations, and it can do text inside of images. And that's my final wrap up of comparing all of these various AI image generators and their best and worst use cases. I hope you found this video valuable, because this video took me forever to make. I had a lot of fun making it. I love nerding out about this stuff, but this video was one of the more intense ones that I've created. Excited to see how your results differ, and hopefully it gives you more clarity on which tools to use in which situations. If you enjoy stuff like this, make sure you check out futuretools.io. This is where I curate all the cool AI tools that I come across on a daily basis. I also curate all the AI news that I come across, and I've got a free newsletter where I will send you all the coolest tools and news directly to your email inbox. You can find it all over at futuretools.io. Thank you once again for tuning in and nerding out. I'm sure this video is longer than one of my normal videos, but I also wanted to be very, very thorough with this one. Hopefully I accomplished that. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, maybe give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to this channel. I'd love to get to 1 million subscribers by the end of 2024. You can help me do that by subscribing. And once again, I really, really appreciate you. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.